Hi there, this is a session on Harvard style referencing. So I'll be talking you through sort of the theory behind referencing first, and then I'll do a practical demo of Cite and Write at the end. My name is Jessica Wilkinson and I'm one of the liaison librarians. So this is what this session will contain. So we'll talk about why you need to reference first and how you can avoid plagiarism. I'll tell you a little bit about Harvard referencing and what's special about that particular style, and then we'll go into Cite and Write briefly and look at how you can use that resource to get the guidance for your referencing. So why bother with referencing then? Well, it's not just an academic exercise. As a professional working in any field, it's important that you can back up your decisions with evidence, and then to credit that evidence, to credit the authors who've written that evidence. So you can say that maybe you based that particular treatment on recent studies written by these people. But at QMU, you will use referencing in your assignments to back up the points that you're making with evidence from others. You can make your arguments or your points more convincing. It's probably not going to be enough just to say, well, this is what I think, this is my opinion, or this is my experience. You need to back up your own opinions with evidence from others. So you can say, well, this is my opinion, and I'm basing it on these recent studies, for instance. If you get your referencing correct, you can avoid plagiarism, which is a serious academic offense. You can also demonstrate your wider reading. You can show your lecturer or whoever's reading your work that you're aware of the important publications in your field. You can also get better marks if you get your referencing correct, but if you mess your referencing up, then you're going to get marked down. So it's important to get your referencing correct. So plagiarism is a very serious academic offense, and it's basically presenting someone else's ideas as if they were yours. So for instance, if you present an idea or a theory or something without referencing the work where that came from, you're implying that that idea is in fact yours. If you copy someone else's work word for word, you maybe cut and paste a large section of text without acknowledging that it's in fact a quotation. It's something that you've taken straight out of the original source. If you're copying and pasting someone else's work, but you change a few words here and there, you move parts of the sentences around, so it's still quite close to the original, but not exactly the same, then that's still plagiarism. If you submit a piece of work for more than one assignment, then that's also plagiarism. It's called self-plagiarism. If you work with friends when it's meant to be an individual piece of work, then that's also plagiarism. And obviously, if you submit someone else's work, like you buy an essay online, for instance, then that's plagiarism. So I think most of the time, students plagiarize by accident. They copy and paste text, they intend to change it later, they forget or they don't change it enough, and then they sort of accidentally plagiarize. Or they might forget to put a citation in. So it's really important to pay attention how you're doing your referencing and how you're presenting information to make sure you get it right. And a good way of doing this is to take good notes. Spend time to understand it, to ensure that you understand what you're reading. And once you've understood something, it's a lot easier to sum it up in your own words. Then you don't need to just copy and paste the text straight into your Word document. You can sum it up. So something that's maybe presented in 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs in the original text, you can sum up in just a few sentences if you've actually understood the whole point of what the author is trying to say. And also make sure that you record where you get all the information from so that you can construct a citation and a reference. So you need to keep track of the author, the title, the year, and all the details that we'll have a look at towards the end of this session. Because having 25 articles spread out on your floor the night before your assignment is due, and you're lying there trying to find that piece of information or that little set of statistics that you've talked about in your essay, and you've forgotten to note down where that information came from, so you have to look through all these texts to try and find it. It's a complete nightmare. So when you're doing your note-taking or you're sort of working in your Word document, building up your essay, make sure you keep track of where all the information is coming from. And then present information by paraphrasing or summarizing it in your own words. So these are 2 examples here. You can have a little think while I'm reading this to see if you think that this will be plagiarism. So this is the original text. Supervision is a complex process that makes demands of supervisors and students alike. You can do much to ease the process by agreeing roles and responsibilities with your supervisor from the outset and sticking to your side of the agreement. And this is the student essay. Supervision is a complicated process and makes demands of both supervisors and students. Students can do much to ease the process by agreeing roles and responsibilities from the start and sticking to their side of the agreement. So do you think that this would be plagiarism? In this case it would be. It's quite similar to the original. You can tell that the students cut and pasted this in and then just replaced a few words here and there. So we have a piece of software called Turnitin that will scan your submission text and compare it to other texts in the Turnitin library. So there will be enough overlap here, I think, for this text to be flagged up as plagiarism. Here's another example from the same article. A good supervisor is a great asset. Trust their judgment as they will have experienced what you are going through and will generally have supervised a number of other dissertations. It's unwise to sidestep your supervisor's guidance. And this is the essay. Lowry 2018 emphasizes the importance of trusting your supervisor and following their advice, since they usually have a lot of experience of situations similar to yours. So do you think this would be plagiarism? Well, here, first of all, we have a citation. So it says Lowry 2018 there, so we know where this is coming from. And then the student has taken the time here to reword the original text. So they've summed up Lowry's argument here and presented it in their own words. So this would not be plagiarism. And this is just a little tick list here. Should I reference when I'm quoting directly from another source? Then yes, because that won't be your words. You're taking them directly from the original text. If you mention a fact that's commonly known, then you don't need to reference. But the question there is, what can be regarded as being commonly known? So if it's really basic information, such as maybe Edinburgh is located in Scotland, like no need to reference there. But when it gets a little bit trickier, maybe sort of basic knowledge in your particular field, then it gets a little bit tricky. So I would always advise that you do reference. If you're not sure, put a reference in. If you're presenting the results of your own survey or experiment, then you can't reference because that is genuinely your work. But if you've based your experiment on someone else's experiment, maybe you read a study and you've replicated the methodology or how the experiment or the survey was conducted, then you need to reference that and you say you used that particular study to base your study on. If you're writing about another researcher's theory or idea using your own words, so you're paraphrasing or summarizing, then yes, you still need to reference that because that's not your theory or idea. If you're using an image from the internet, then yes, that's not your image, so you need to reference it. If you're using facts and figures from another writer to support your own argument, then yes, of course, reference. They're not your facts and figures that you've gathered, you've got them from someone else's work. If you're using a diagram from a book, then again reference, because that's not the diagram that you've constructed. If you're including statistics or information that your lecturer or another educator gave you in a lecture or event, then yes, you need to reference. If it's information that you got in a personal conversation, then yes, you need to reference that as well. So pretty much everything. There are many different styles of referencing, for instance, Harvard, Vancouver, APA, and so on. But most students at QMU use Harvard Cite and Write for their referencing. That's the name of the style. Some students, such as psychology students, use APA. So if your lecturer hasn't told you which style of referencing to use, ask them. It's highly likely to be Harvard Cite and Write, but ask just in case. Even within Harvard, there are lots of different variations. So the particular style that we use comes from Cite and Write. That's the name of the website we use for guidance, and I'll show you that at the end of this session. But as you're reading articles, you will come across many different referencing styles. Sometimes when you have an electronic journal article, up at the top there might be a little tool that you can use to generate a reference. Sometimes you can choose which style you want that reference to be in, or you can copy and paste a ready-made reference. That's fine as a starting point. You can copy and paste that, but then you need to look at Cite and Write and move things around. Add in like the little commas and the full stops and everything that's in Cite and Write to make sure that reference follows the Harvard Cite and Write guidance. So Harvard Cite and Write has two parts: citations in the flow of your text, and then a reference list at the back. So the citations, you need to slot them in. We've touched on this already. You slot them in as soon as you refer to someone else's idea or argument in the body of your work. You need the author's surname and publication date. And if you're talking about some information that appears on a particular page in the publication, you need to also include the page numbers in your citation. Whereas if you're talking about the publication as a whole, then you don't need page numbers. It's just to save the person who's reading your work, maybe your lecturer or someone else. They shouldn't have to flick through like the whole book or the whole article to find a piece of information that you're talking about in your assignment. They should be able to go straight to that page if it's something that's presented on a particular page. And then you can present this in different ways. You don't have to stick to just the same way. You can sort of mix these up. So as people are reading your work, it's not always the same format. It needs to have a sort of a nice flow to it. So you can write it this way. There's a definite trend for people to complain more frequently in the winter months than in the summertime. Smith, 2003. So author and year. Or you can do it this way around. According to Smith, 2003, people will complain more during the winter months. So because I've got Smith there in my normal sentence text, I don't have Smith again in the brackets because they're coming straight afterwards. So it would be Smith, Smith. If I put Smith in the brackets there, it doesn't really make any sense. So you keep a little bit of common sense when you do your referencing as well and make sure there's a nice flow. And then in the reference list at the back, you got the full details of all the publications that you've cited. And you list these in the order of the author's surname. Sometimes a whole bunch of different people have written a book or an article. Don't start reordering them into alphabetical order or something. You go with the order they're presented in the original publication. So this is an example of a reference list. As you can see, it's alphabetical by the author's surname. And if you have a company or an organization, you slot that in alphabetically as well. So we use Cite and Write for our guidance at QMU. We also have a referencing library guide that you need to keep an eye on as well, because there's a little bit of extra guidance in there, as well as the access URL for the access link to Cite and Write. So I'll go in here in just a bit, show you the library guide and Cite and Write. So just to sum up, QMU uses Cite and Write Harvard for the majority of students. If you're unsure which referencing style you need to use, ask your lecturers. Use Cite and Write for your guidance, stick to the format there, and also refer to the referencing library guide if Cite and Write mentions something about local rules or local guidance in some circumstances. Those will be in the library referencing guide. If you have a specific query, you can contact your liaison librarian. So sometimes you might have a tricky resource that you've used and you can't tell if it's a journal article or some kind of report or what it is. Then send the details to your liaison librarian and they can try and figure out what guidance you should be looking at in Cite and Write. So let me just go in to Cite and Write and we'll have a look. So I'm just on the Queen Margaret webpage here and I'm clicking on library in the top right corner. There's links into the referencing information all over the library webpage, so it doesn't matter how you find your way in there. It's always going to be exactly the same guide that you're looking at. So if you were to go into the QMU library guides, like each subject that we teach has its own library guide. Within each guide there's a tab for referencing. There's also a link to that exact same information here, referencing and how to do it. So there's lots of general information here about referencing and citations and that kind of thing. And here is the link for Cite them Right. I'm just going to get myself logged in. So you want to log in via your institution. So Queen Margaret. Use your standard QEMU login details, student number and your password. And now I'm logged in. So on the first page, there's lots of general information about referencing, sort of articles about particular topics. There is one of these articles about what can be considered to be commonly known, for instance, and lots of different guides and things here. Up in the top corner here on the right, there's a tutorial as well. So if you're a little bit rusty, you haven't done referencing for a while, or if you've never done it really, or maybe when you did it you might have used a different referencing style, then you can work your way through this tutorial. And if you know some bits of it, you can skip those and then concentrate on the parts here that you're not too sure about. But usually when you're in here and you're trying to figure out how to reference something, the easiest way to do it is to use the categories here along the top. So you need to think, what is it I'm trying to reference? It doesn't matter about, file format or anything like that, if it's in a PDF or, that kind of thing. You need to figure out what kind of category is it. Is it a book? Is it a journal? Is it like a website? Is it something digital or something from the internet? Is it something to do with media and art? Is it a research report? Is it a legal document of some kind? Is it something from the government, or is it some kind of communication? So try and find the best match here. So let's say it's a journal article. Now along the top here, we've got links to all the different referencing styles that Cite them Right covers. So you make sure you're looking at the correct guidance. So Harvard comes first here, so we're happy. So you got different categories of journal articles here, but I'm just going to go with the standard journal article. On the left, you can also check that you're actually looking at the Harvard guidance. If you, for instance, you got a little bit lost, you're in one of the other styles, then you can change it here as well. And then these guidance pages tend to follow the same format. You have a little write-up telling you what this is, what is a journal article. Then it tells you the order, so in which order you need to present the information to construct a reference for your reference list. So when you're doing your note taking, these are the kind of details that you need to keep track of so that you can construct a reference. And then it gives you examples. So is it a print article? Probably not. Is it an electronic article with a DOI? A DOI is a permanent link, so digital object identifier. If you can get a DOI, that's the best kind of link to work with. And a DOI will have DOI in it, in the URL here. So that's the best thing to use. If you can't get a DOI, then just work with a standard URL. But if you have a standard URL, not a DOI, you need to add this little piece of information at the end of your reference, accessed, and then the date in this particular format. That's because this is not a permanent link. So when your lecturer comes to double check that you've summed up the information properly, then that information could have changed. So if they can see that you maybe accessed that article 2 weeks ago, they'll understand, okay, something's changed here. Whereas with the DOI, you don't need to include the date at the end of your reference because that's a permanent link. That information will always be available at that link. It's not going to change. So these are the kinds of details you need to keep an eye on, and then pick the example that most closely matches your particular article. It might not be 100% match, but pick the closest one. And then you start constructing your reference. You can obviously start typing it in your Word document, absolutely fine, or you can use this empty box on the right. You could have your online article open in another tab, and you can move back and forth and start constructing this reference with the guidance here. So you could look here, what's the surname, what's the initial, and you just slot the information in here in the box on the right. And that way you can make sure that the little commas and full stops and brackets and all these little fiddly details are there in the right place. So using the categories is the easiest thing. Research, for instance, is an academic, unpublished or confidential research report. This is something scientific, and so on. Find the best match for the text that you've got. Sometimes it's not super clear. You might have been in here looking and you think none of these are a brilliant match for the text that I've got. In that case, you can use this search box. So maybe it's some kind of guidelines. You can do a search. But you need to be careful if you go in this way and you've searched for it, because now we have a mix here of different referencing styles. Harvard is no longer necessarily at the top, so make sure you look at the right one. Always check on the left here, are you looking at Harvard? And then what I would do is to have a little read in this information here at the top. What kind of guidelines and protocols are we talking about here? What's this for? Have a look at the examples. Are these examples similar to what you've got? Is it some kind of hospital guidelines that you had in mind? So that's how to use Cite and Write. Browse the categories or use the search box. Keep an eye on what referencing style you're actually looking at. Right, I think that's it for me. So thanks very much for watching this. And remember, you can contact your liaison librarian if you have any questions to do with referencing. We can't proofread your entire reference list, but if you have maybe one or two references that you're struggling with, then please send the details to your librarian and see if they can help you. Okay, thank you very much for this, and good luck with your referencing.